And when it comes to the worship of God, then children are to join with their parents in the assembly as part of it. This was the practice all the way back into the Old Testament. Look, for example, in Exodus 10, where Pharaoh told Moses that he could go and worship the Lord with the men of Israel. Pharaoh said, you can go and worship with the men of Israel, but not the children. Don't take the children along. Look at what Moses' reply is in Exodus 10:9. Moses said, we will go with our young and our old, with our sons and our daughters, with our flocks and our herds we will go, for we must hold a feast to the Lord. The inclusion of children was mandatory. And God also declared it as a standing requirement for worship. In Deuteronomy 31:12, he said, gather the people together, men and women and little ones, and the stranger who is within your gates, that they may hear, and that they may learn to fear the Lord your God, and carefully observe all the words of this law. And that their children who have not known it may hear and learn to fear the Lord your God as long as you live in the land which you cross the Jordan to possess. It is true that when Israel went up to the Passover and other feasts, that sometimes they had a long way to travel. And God told them that only the men needed to go up representing their families. But as we have seen, they were supposed to have a weekly convocation, a holy gathering in all of their villages, all the places where they lived. And in those assemblies, certainly the children would go. And the children could go to the Passover as well if they were more conveniently located or able to travel. Children were welcome, and they participated when they could. And the holy convocation that was supposed to be held, they didn't always hold those. They were supposed to be held through all their ages. Those are places where the children were included. This practice clearly carries over into the New Testament as well. Whenever letters are written to churches which were to be read in the assembly, then it's just understood that children are present. Because when Paul wrote, like to the Ephesians, for example, he writes and then he says to the saints at Ephesus, and he writes to them. And then later on in the letter, he addresses the women. He says, wives. And he tells them, gives them instruction. And he says, husbands. He gives them instruction. Then he says, children. And he gives them instruction. They were not in some separate place. They were worshiping with their parents in the assembly. We need to see this because sadly it has become common practice to exclude children from the worshiping assembly. Sometimes even providing a separate worshiping assembly. I mean, it's one thing in a practical sense if children are crying or they're little babies or things like that, have a place for them to sleep. But we're talking about excluding them deliberately in some kind of a separate worship service for them that's supposed to be more suitable to them somehow. No one ever did this until relatively modern times, at least no one that I know of. And interestingly, since this practice was started, there have been greater and greater numbers of children that depart from the faith when they get older, when they grow up. Remember what Moses said, that you do this that they may learn to fear me, that the children may learn to fear me. Such assemblies for children are not appointed by God. And we can't expect him to bless what he has not appointed any more than he could bless Jeroboam when he worshipped at Bethel instead of at Jerusalem. They teach children also that worship is to be determined by what appeals to them, instead of that you're coming before a holy God. This has had the bad fruit of causing many who grow up in these situations and who don't necessarily depart to then want juvenile worship when they're adults. You see kids that grow up with this stuff, and then the worship of the church, it looks like child's play when they're adults. And they do things that have nothing to do with the reverent worship of the living and true God. So this is where we need to be careful to follow what God has appointed. Children are to be part of the assembly.